A teenager in Mississippi is facing very serious charges after police say she tried to kill her own mother in her sleep. We're analyzing the bizarre statement she reportedly made to police with forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Behr. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It has been 1 week since a 15-year-old girl, 15, was arrested for the attempted murder of her own mother in Gulfport, Mississippi. And we're still working to learn more of the details about this alleged crime. But here's what we do know. So according to Gulfport police, officers, they responded to a home in the early morning hours of June 14th to what officials call a, quote, cutting incident. Now, the victim in this case said that she had been asleep when her own daughter, Lexi Jade Brown, 15 years old, allegedly attacked her with a knife. The mom reportedly had multiple stab wounds, but this alleged attack didn't stop there. No, because the victim says Lexi also tried to set the house on fire. According to a news release from Gulfport police, quote, while being questioned by detectives, Brown stated that she had been planning to kill the victim because she found her to be a weird B word and accused her of suppressing the black in her. Brown was charged with attempted murder and first-degree arson. She was taken to the Harris County Adult Detention Center, and her bond was set at $1.25 million. My understanding is that perpetrators over the age of 13 in Mississippi, they can be charged as adults. And according to Mississippi court records, Brown is next set to appear before a judge on June 26. Okay, to talk about this, I want to bring in clinical psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Behr. Doctor, great to have you. Now, look, I know you haven't had the opportunity to examine Brown, so I understand that. But putting that to the side, what are your initial thoughts about this one?
You know, a lot of questions, more questions than answers. But, you know, a 15-year-old girl that has that much rage to try to kill her mother, I have to wonder what's been going on in that home. Now, I have heard that her mother made the suggestion that she was seeing a psychiatrist and that she had heard voices. We know, for example, that a lot of times voices are a normal part of development. Hallucinations in 70% of people don't turn out to be schizophrenia. They can be caused by depression, anxiety, trauma, substance use. So I wonder if there was some substance use here that may have been contributing to this. What were her prior psychiatric records looking like? Was there a history of violence? I have a lot of questions here.
I think we all do. The age, you mentioned that, 15-year-old girl, I mentioned it before. How does age factor into this?
So this is something that, you know, even the Supreme Court recognized in a case called Roper v. Simmons, this phrase that's thrown around about the evolving standards of decency. We know that the brain does not finish fully developing until around age 25. And the last part of the brain that develops right here, called the prefrontal cortex, is that part of the brain that's responsible for what we call executive functioning, planning, organizing, and impulse control. Now, there is a suggestion here that this was a premeditated crime and she had been planning to do it for a long time. But again, you know, with someone who is 15 years old, we know that they don't have the emotional maturity of adults. They don't have the ability to exercise restraint. And very often they don't weigh the future consequences of their actions. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration here.
I believe Mississippi has the insanity defense. Is that something, and I know we have limited facts here, the idea of a daughter allegedly stabbing her mother, you could say in and of itself that seems insane, but you and I both know that that bar is so high, and for a reason, right? Because if everybody could claim insanity, then that would be a defense where they aren't sent to ultimately prison, but they could be sent to a psychiatric facility. But walk me through whether or not you think that's something that could be considered at this point in time.
Well, listen, no, juries don't like the insanity defense. They don't like someone not being responsible for a crime that they committed. This is something that has come up since the John Hinckley Jr. Assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan, where all this legislation was changed around. So obviously, if you're the defense attorney for this young woman, or young girl, you're going to want to try everything you can. So, you know, we know that the insanity defense is rarely used, and even when it's used, it's rarely successful. But again, in a case like this, where the facts are so severe, I think you're going to, you know, throw anything against the wall and see what sticks.
And usually it's you would have to really not appreciate what you're doing, not fully comprehending the actual circumstances of your act, that you're not appreciating the difference between right and wrong and this being a lawful or unlawful attack or act.
Exactly. I mean, there are
And that's
differences in the
tough.
statutes. That there are differences in the statutes from state to state, but that's essentially what it is. That you could not appreciate what you were doing was wrong, and that's, like you said, a very high bar.
Now, I am curious about this, though. The actual method that was used here. So, stabbing somebody, allegedly stabbing somebody while they sleep. What do you think about that? Because that's a very, very specific way to ultimately try to kill somebody.
Well, that's why I said when we started the conversation, there had to be so much rage there, because stabbing someone is about as up close and personal as it gets, and doing it while they're asleep and essentially completely defenseless. There's a special rage, I think, that must be present in someone to do something like that. So I don't know what was going on in this home, and I don't know what was going on inside this young girl's head, but whatever it was, there must have been so much resentment and just blind rage that she would do something to a woman who was her mother, and do it in such a savage way.
Pretty frightening case when you think about it. And I always say, when I talk about these stories, I'm constantly reminded how this world is so unpredictable. It's scary, I know. And honestly, one of the scariest things that could happen, something that comes out of nowhere, is if you get hurt, you get injured. What do you do? But that is why I want to take a minute to call out our great partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. This is a firm you would want in your corner because they are specialists in this area. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm, and for a reason. They win a lot. They have secured multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements. In fact, they secured a $120 million verdict in one of the first personal injury trials post-pandemic. And by the way, in that case, there was a pretrial offer of just $20,000. Yeah, Morgan & Morgan, they don't settle for lowball offers. They fight for what you deserve. But one of the best things about Morgan & Morgan is how easy they make this whole process for their clients. From starting your claim, to uploading documents, to signing contracts, to talking to your legal team, it can all be done from your smartphone. That's it. Seeing if you have a case only takes a few minutes. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar or by dialing pound law, that's pound 529 on your phone. I've talked to mental health professionals before who talk about almost when people commit these kinds of crimes, and of course this is an alleged crime, she hasn't been convicted, it's almost like there's a separation, that someone doesn't view the victim as an actual person. It's almost like an object. Do you believe that?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, there was, when I would get a case like this, I would want to do, so much and look at so many different factors, even look at something medical like a seizure disorder, hallucinations in someone this young. There are a number of neurological things you would want to rule out. So you may want to get what we call an EEG and an MRI and look at other things to make sure that there wasn't, even a tumor that was growing in this young girl's head. You just have to look at everything.
If with these alleged, I don't even know what you call it, is kind of these statements that she allegedly made to law enforcement, possibly a confession that she's a weird bee, that her mom's a weird bee, and she was suppressing the black in her. What do you make of those specific statements?
Maybe some of her friends were of African American descent. Maybe it was the crowd that she hung out with. Maybe there's some racist overtones here. Maybe her mother didn't approve of that. It's impossible to really know. But again, for her to make a statement like that, that again tells me there is really no, there's no level of restraint there. There's no impulse control. An adult would probably hold back and maybe say they want to speak to an attorney, but she's essentially a child. So when you're talking about people this young and charging them as adults, I find that a little bit concerning, honestly.
Yeah, I didn't know what that statement meant either. It could have been, like you said, it could have been a racial kind of statement. Could have been, darkness, black, light. This idea of evil. If that's the way she was characterizing.
Exactly. Yeah. When you hear the term
meant.
Dark, it can be interpreted a number of different ways.
Like dark spirits or dark things like that, dark beliefs.
Yep.
I don't. I really don't know. And that's what makes it, equally disturbing. And then there's the fire, right? So whether it was, I don't know, the purpose was to kill her, kill herself, cover up the evidence. But the use or the idea of setting a fire, does that affect the analysis as well?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, whether this was to try to cover up the evidence, whether it was to make it look like someone else did it and make it more difficult for forensic to figure out what was going on. I mean, any of those are possibilities, really.
That would make an insanity defense tough, because if you're covering up the evidence, then you know what you did was wrong.
Right. Efforts to conceal the crime don't help with an insanity defense.
Doctor, if you had the opportunity to examine Ms. Brown, what would you ask her? What would that conversation look like?
I think I would try to establish a rapport with her first and maybe get to know her before I got to the actual act itself, because I think with kids, it's important to try to gain that trust before you question them. And, a lot of people just specialize in these child interviews, and those are really the best people to talk to kids. Because, you don't want to obviously lead them in a direction that's not consistent with the facts. So I think you have to approach the situation very cautiously.
Do you think both sides are going to have their own their mental health professionals examine her? So if this does go to a trial, the prosecution will want to have her examined and the defense will want to have her examined?
Oh, I think almost certainly.
And what would that look like? Would there be a difference of opinion?
Often these cases come down to a battle of the experts. So you would hope that when they retain an expert, that the expert would go where the facts lead them and not be a hired gun. But again, we know that in this field, there are some people that unfortunately are hired guns. So you would hope that they would come to a credible and scientifically based opinion.
And whether whoever is trying to get that information from her, and going back to what you had said, how do you get that information out of her? You said you try to build up a rapport, particularly with somebody so young, but how do you ultimately get to the event? How do you ultimately get to an explanation of what happened here?
You would want her to, give a narrative of what happened that night. And maybe you would start off by saying something like, so how are things going with you and your mom? How are you getting along with her? And instead of coming in the front door, sort of coming around to the side and trying to get her to open up that way,
Right.
What happened? Why did you kill your mom? What did you do? You want to try to get around to it in a way that's a little more subtle and a little more nuanced.
So, as I mentioned, we don't have a ton of information at this point. I will tell you, anybody that has information related to this alleged attack, they're asked to contact the Gulfport Police Department at 228-868-5959 or Mississippi Coast Crime Stoppers at 877-787-5898. Really disturbing story, but Dr. Goldberg, thank you so much for coming on and giving your perspective on it. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on this episode of Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.